For over 6 decades, Hollywood whispered about what really happened between Angie Dickinson and Ricky Nelson. The rumors, the speculation, the endless gossip columns trying to make sense of their connection. Now, at 94 years old, Angie is finally ready to set the record straight. And what she reveals isn't what anyone expected. What happens when two of Hollywood's brightest stars find themselves drawn together in an era when every glance was scrutinized and every conversation became tomorrow's headline? This isn't a story about scandal or secret affairs. It's something far more profound, far more human, and honestly, far more heartbreaking. Angie Dickinson, the woman who shattered glass ceilings, who stood toe-to-toe with John Wayne, who became television's first female detective, is finally speaking with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes when you've lived almost a century and have nothing left to prove. And what she's saying about Ricky Nelson will completely change how you understand one of America's most beloved entertainers. Stay with me because this journey takes us from the golden age of Hollywood through tragedy, triumph, and a truth that's been hiding in plain sight for generations. Before we dive into her revelation about Ricky Nelson, you need to understand who Angie Dickinson really is, because her story is extraordinary all on its own. Picture this. September 30th, 1931, in the tiny town of Culm, North Dakota. The Great Depression is crushing America, and a little girl named Angeline Brown is born into a world where just surviving takes everything you've got. Her father wasn't wealthy, but he was something better. He was a newspaper editor and publisher, a man who dealt in words and ideas. From him, young Angeline inherited something money couldn't buy: a razor-sharp mind, an insatiable curiosity, and a deep respect for truth. When the family packed up and headed to California, nobody could have predicted that this smart, poised young woman would become one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. She wasn't chasing fame, not at first. Angie enrolled in college, studying business and drama, figuring she'd have a normal life, maybe a steady career. Then, fate intervened in the most Hollywood way possible. A beauty contest, a television appearance. Suddenly, Columbia Pictures comes knocking with a contract, and just like that, Angeline Brown from North Dakota is thrust into the golden age of the studio system. But here's what made Angie different from every other beautiful woman trying to make it in Hollywood. She had substance. Sure, she was stunning, absolutely breathtaking, but she brought something else to the screen: intelligence, warmth, emotional depth. When audiences watched Angie Dickinson, they didn't just see a movie star. They wanted to admire her from a distance. They saw someone they felt they could actually know. The turning point came in 1959 with a little western called Rio Bravo. Director Howard Hawks cast her opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin, and Angie absolutely owned that screen. Playing Feathers, a saloon singer who could match wits with the toughest men in the room without losing an ounce of her femininity or power, that performance announced to the world that Angie Dickinson was a force to be reckoned with. Throughout the 1960s, she was everywhere. Ocean's 11, she was there. The Killers, absolutely mesmerizing. Point Blank, opposite Lee Marvin, a masterclass in restraint and psychological complexity. Angie refused to be boxed in, refused to play the same type over and over. She wanted roles that challenged her, that pushed boundaries, that meant something. But then came 1974, and Angie Dickinson didn't just make television history, she rewrote it entirely. Policewoman put her front and center as Sergeant Suzanne Pepper Anderson, making her the first woman to headline a successful TV drama as a police officer. Think about what that meant in 1974. Women on television were typically the love interest, the secretary, or the worried wife waiting at home. But here was Angie, carrying a badge and a gun, solving crimes, showing authority, intelligence, and courage, while remaining emotionally human and relatable. The show was a massive hit, and its impact echoed for decades. Every female-led crime drama you love today, from Cagney and Lacey to The Closer to Mayor of Easttown, owes a debt to what Angie Dickinson proved was possible back in 1974. Now here's where most Hollywood stars from that era would rest on their laurels, do the occasional nostalgic interview, maybe collect a Lifetime Achievement Award and call it a career. Not Angie Dickinson.
She kept reinventing herself in ways that were bold, unexpected, and sometimes downright shocking. In 1980, she starred in Brian De Palma's film Dressed to Kill, a provocative thriller that introduced her to an entirely new generation. But it was the 1990s when Angie really started taking the kinds of risks that left people's jaws on the floor. In 1993, she appeared in Oliver Stone's mind-bending miniseries Wild Palms, playing a sadistic, militant character that was about as far from her glamorous image as you could get. She wasn't interested in being comfortable or safe. She wanted to unsettle people, to make them think, to strip away the Hollywood polish and show something raw underneath. That same year, in Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, she played a ruthless spa owner with such fierce intensity that it became impossible to look away. Power, cruelty, entitlement. She embraced every uncomfortable aspect of the character and refused to soften a single edge. And get this, when producers tried to honor her with a This Is Your Life special that November, she walked off the set, just left. Why? Because she refused to let anyone reduce her complex, fascinating life to sentimental television fluff. That's Angie Dickinson, fiercely independent, uncompromising, always on her own terms.
But away from the cameras and the sets, Angie's personal life was unfolding with its own share of complexity, heartbreak, and resilience. Her first marriage to football player Gene Dickinson in 1952 seemed promising, but ultimately couldn't withstand the pressures of two people growing in different directions. They separated in 1956 and officially divorced in 1960, though Angie chose to keep his surname, a decision that spoke to her sense of identity and professional continuity. During this period, something remarkable happened that most people don't know about. Angie formed a deep friendship with economist John Kenneth Galbraith and his wife. This wasn't just Hollywood socializing, this was genuine intellectual stimulation. She traveled with them during Galbraith's time as U.S. ambassador to India, immersing herself in diplomacy, global affairs, and conversations that expanded her worldview far beyond Hollywood. She appears in Galbraith's memoirs not as a celebrity guest, but as a thoughtful, engaged participant in discussions about the world's most pressing issues. Then came 1965, and her marriage to Burt Bacharach, one of the most brilliant composers of the 20th century. Two creative powerhouses at the peak of their careers. It should have been a fairy tale, and for a while it was magical. But the demands of their professions, the pressure of constant public scrutiny, and the complexities that come with any intense creative partnership eventually took their toll. On July 12, 1966, their daughter Nikki was born, and everything changed. Nikki was autistic, and in that era, understanding and support for autism were heartbreakingly limited. The challenges Nikki faced brought immense strain to the marriage and deep concern that never left Angie's heart. The marriage to Bacharach lasted 16 years, ending in 1981, but the bond they shared over their daughter remained. And then came the devastating blow that no parent should ever have to endure. On January 4, 2007, Nikki died by suicide. The loss was shattering, a reminder that behind even the most luminous public personas, there exists private grief that the cameras never capture. Burt Bacharach himself passed away in 2023, closing a chapter of shared history marked by both profound love and profound loss. Now we arrive at the heart of this story, what Angie Dickinson, at 94 years old, finally wants the world to understand about Ricky Nelson. For decades, rumors swirled. Were they involved? Was it a romance, an affair? The tabloids couldn't get enough of speculating about the age difference, the timing, and the nature of their connection. And Angie stayed quiet, let people think what they wanted, because some things felt too personal, too precious to explain. Until now. People always wanted to turn everything into a romance, Angie says, with a gentleness that comes from having nothing left to prove. But what Ricky and I shared was more complicated and more meaningful than that. Think about the early 1960s when their paths crossed. Angie was an established actress, respected for her intelligence and talent.
Ricky Nelson was America's golden boy, the teen idol with the $1 million smile, the hit records, and millions of screaming fans. He'd been famous literally since childhood, growing up on television in The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, his entire adolescence playing out in front of the entire country. He was adored, Angie recalls, and that kind of adoration can be a prison, especially when you're so young. Here's what Angie wants you to understand. Yes, there was an age difference, and yes, people whispered, but that wasn't the real gap between them. The real divide was experience, not of years, but of life lived privately versus life lived entirely in public. Ricky had been famous since childhood. I don't think people understood how much that took from him. He never really had the chance to discover who he was without an audience watching. Beneath that perfect teen idol image, Angie saw something the public never did. A thoughtful, deeply introspective young man struggling to reconcile the expectations placed on him with his desire to grow as an artist and as a human being. He was sweet and polite, almost old-fashioned, but there was a sadness there, a loneliness. I saw it right away. Ricky Nelson wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted to evolve beyond the teen heartthrob image, wanted to be seen as a legitimate musician and actor. But every time he tried to step forward, the weight of expectation pulled him back. He wanted to be taken seriously, not just screamed at, Angie explains. So what was their relationship really about? According to Angie, it wasn't romance or publicity or Hollywood gamesmanship. It was a connection. It was two people in an industry that rarely slows down long enough for real conversation, finding in each other someone who actually listened. There was no agenda, no manipulation, just two people talking, laughing, trying to understand each other in a world that didn't slow down for anyone. I think I may have been someone he could talk to honestly. And here's where Angie's reflection becomes truly profound. As the years passed and their lives naturally moved in different directions, she never forgot what Ricky represented to her. Ricky was a warning, she says softly. Fame can freeze you in time. It can stop you from growing if you're not careful.
On December 31st, 1985, Ricky Nelson died in a plane crash in DeKalb, Texas. He was only 45 years old. And news hit Angie harder than she expected, bringing with it a wave of emotions she'd been carrying for decades. It felt unfinished, like he never got the chance to live the life he wanted. That breaks my heart to this day. She often wondered, still wonders, who Ricky might have become if he'd been allowed to truly age, to evolve beyond the teen idol image, to escape the shadow of his own legend. Would he have found the artistic fulfillment he craved? Would he have discovered peace? Ricky wasn't weak, Angie insists with quiet conviction. He was sensitive, and sensitivity is dangerous in a world that rewards image over truth. This is what Angie wants people to understand now, at 94, with the clarity that only a long life can provide. Ricky Nelson wasn't a cautionary tale about excess or poor choices. He was a cautionary tale about what happens when we refuse to let people grow, when we demand they remain frozen as the version of themselves we fell in love with. I hope people remember him for his talent and for the human being behind the fame, Angie says, her smile tinged with sadness. When Angie Dickinson finally opens up about Ricky Nelson, she's not rewriting history or creating scandal. She's humanizing it. She's stripping away decades of speculation and gossip to reveal something simple and profound. Two people saw each other clearly in a world of surfaces and pretense. At 94, Angie has outlived most of her contemporaries, survived heartbreaking personal losses, and witnessed the evolution of an industry she helped shape. The glamour of old Hollywood has faded into memory, replaced by something more valuable: honesty, unfiltered and deeply human. Time has stripped away the myths, the rumors, and the manufactured narratives.
What remains is memory and meaning, and the understanding that sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones that can't be easily categorized or explained in a headline. Angie never needed Ricky Nelson to be her great romance or her defining relationship. What they shared transcended those simple labels. He was a mirror that reflected the cost of fame. She was a refuge that offered understanding without judgment. People always want to make everything so simple, Angie reflects. But life isn't simple. People aren't simple. What we meant to each other was real, even if it doesn't fit the story everyone wanted to tell. And perhaps that's the most important truth she's sharing now. The genuine human connection doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that some of the most meaningful relationships in our lives exist in spaces the public never sees and wouldn't understand even if they could. So here we are, more than 3 decades after Ricky Nelson's tragic death, finally hearing the truth from someone who actually knew him, who saw past the image to the complicated human being underneath. Angie Dickinson's revelation isn't scandalous, it's something much more powerful. It's a reminder that behind every famous face, behind every manufactured image, a real person is struggling with the same fundamental human needs we all share: to be seen, to be understood, to grow beyond who we were into who we might become. Ricky Nelson never got that chance, not fully. He remained forever suspended in the amber of his teen idol years, unable to escape the very fame that had made him a star. And Angie Dickinson, who broke every barrier, who refused to be defined by anyone else's expectations, understood that better than anyone. At 94, she's not asking for your approval or your agreement. She's simply telling you what was true, offering a gift of clarity to a man who deserves to be remembered not as a frozen image from the past, but as the sensitive, talented, complicated human being he actually was. If this story touched you, if it made you think differently about fame, about image, about the cost of living your entire life in the public eye, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Because stories like this, real, honest, human stories, need to be told. We're so used to the gossip, the manufactured drama, the clickbait headlines that reduce complex people to simple narratives. But the truth is always more interesting, always more moving than the fiction. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep dives into the real stories behind Hollywood's biggest legends. We're not here for surface-level gossip. We're here for the truth, the context, the humanity behind the headlines. And here's the most important part. Share this video. Share it with someone who remembers Ricky Nelson's music, who grew up watching the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and is a fan of Angie Dickinson's incredible career. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that fame isn't always glamorous, that sensitivity is a strength, not a weakness, and that the truth is always worth waiting for, even if it takes 60 years to arrive. Drop a comment below telling me, did this change how you think about Ricky Nelson, about Angie Dickinson, about the price of fame? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what resonated with you. Until next time, remember, the best stories aren't about the image people project, they're about the truth people carry. And sometimes that truth is worth the wait.